Hey there. So I've done quite a few videos now talking about the 3C, and if you've seen those, particularly the review, you know that I do think quite highly of that device. In fact, in the review, I call the 3C the best all-around e-ink tablet or device that you can buy today, and I still feel that way. But doesn't mean that it's the best at everything it does. In fact, far from it. So this video, I'm going to highlight, for me personally, things that I think other devices do better than the 3C. So while all these devices, I think, aren't as good of an all-around device as the 3C, I prefer to use them for various reasons. So, for example, we'll talk about why the Tab Mini C is a preferred e-reader versus the 3C. We'll go into the Bigme Inknote Color Plus. Now, I actually did replace that with the 3C, and I think the 3C is the better device, but there's one feature in particular I really miss in having made that exchange, so I want to talk about that. And then finally, and I'll spend probably the most time in this video, is I want to talk about the 3C versus the Supernote, because I use the Supernote at work as my daily driver, and I use the 3C at home, and I have not considered using the 3C to replace the Supernote. So I'm going to explain exactly why, and give you a sense of why other devices can do things better than the 3C. So really, I guess the ultimate takeaway, and this is always the case with e-ink devices, is that you have to be careful that you understand what your particular use cases are for that device, and then try to find the one that fits the best. So while I love the 3C, I do recommend to people the 3C. Here are some cases where the 3C would not be my pick. And so that's what this video is about. So hopefully you find it informative and fun, and let's get on into it. The first comparison I want to make is talking about the 3C relative to e-readers that are 8-inch screens or less. And in my particular case, I have the Tab Mini C. This is my preferred e-reader. And basically, the point I want to make, the Tab Mini C and the 3C are using, comparable, not the same, but comparable operating systems. Certainly for things like reading, Kobo or Kindle and those sorts of things, the functionality is identical between the two. So the only real distinguishing feature for the purposes of an e-reader is the size of the screen and the weight of the device. Now, it's true that the size of the screen for the 3C is nice. It's kind of like reading a hardcover book versus a traditional softcover book. You appreciate all the space that you get on all the words you can fit onto one page and that sort of thing. So there are advantages to the 3C, but the ultimate disadvantage really does come down to that form factor. And, I'm holding this Mini C aloft just to make this point. I can hold on to this grip for quite a while. Now, there's a little bit of weight to the Mini C. It's not as light as other e-readers. But nevertheless, I can hold this quite comfortably longer than I can hold the 3C. You can hold the 3C in one hand for brief periods of time, but you start to feel that weight pretty soon. Now, what does it matter whether I'm holding on to a device with one hand or not? Well, there's a couple things. First off, right now, my elbow is on top of my desk, and I'm able to hold the device at roughly the same level as my head. So it's nice. You don't have to bend your head down or what have you. The book is right there in front of you, and you can use your thumb, to turn the pages accordingly. So it's a very nice way ergonomically to hold on to the device. So that's the first thing. The other thing is it frees up the other hand. So I could be reading a book, for example, and grabbing a coffee mug and taking a drink and advancing the page, all the while maintaining that single-handed grip. So that really is the predominant advantage of why I think an e-reader like this still remains superior to a device like the 3C. The 3C simply wasn't able to shed enough weight where that you could do this same type of single-handed reading with that larger screen. And for that reason, I think an e-reader like the Mini C is preferable for reading like novels and some nonfiction, etc., because of this form factor. Now, it's true here in the study, I do have a little bit of an ottoman and a chair that can lean back, and in those cases, I can prop up the 3C on my legs and then basically read from there, and it works pretty well. You know, you are looking down a little bit, but it's still relatively comfortable. Glare isn't an issue and that sort of thing. But only in the study do I have that. If I'm going to read, you know, in bed, if I'm going to read in the backyard, I've got a reading chair downstairs. In all those cases, holding the device like this is my preferred method, and that's where I do most of my reading. All right, so we've got the Boox device here on the right, and we've got the device, the Boox device replaced in my office, which is the Bigme Inknote Color Plus. And clearly the Boox device is the better of the two devices, but the Inknote device was and remains still a really good device. It's just, you know, the 3C was just better. But the one area where the 3C does not improve on what the Inknote Plus is around highlighting. So right now I've made a list on each device. I'm going to show the 3 different highlight colors I tend to use and how they're much more superior on this device than on this device. Let's go ahead and do that then. We'll start with this blue highlight. So in the Boox device, there isn't a quote-unquote highlighter. There is, in fact, a marker. So that's the distinction. So let's go ahead and use blue here on top. Okay, see it's very foggy and milky. Let's go ahead and try another color, which is this kind of purplish color. Okay, same deal. And then let's finally, do yellow, like so. I'm gonna go ahead and refresh. So it looks a little bit better, but still not great. Okay, let's now do the exact same exercise over here. Again, we'll start with blue. So, go into purple. So, go into yellow. It's orange. There's yellow. Call it lemon. Oops, don't like that. There we go. All right. I know a lot of people will probably think that I'm nitpicking and that this doesn't matter, and indeed it wasn't enough for me to keep using the Inknote Plus, but I think these highlights are vastly superior. Look how sharp the highlights are. Look how nice the color just goes into the background, doesn't mar the text at all, so you can completely read the text. You know, over here, you know, the colors aren't quite as sharp. You know, obviously the lines aren't as defined because they're hand-drawn. I just think that how Bigme implemented the highlighters is just vastly superior to what Boox did. Now, I do want to point out that highlighting in a reader app is a different function, and it works much differently. So I'm only talking about the highlighting function or the equivalent in the note-taking apps. But clearly, this is something I really wish Boox would take a page from Bigme and adopt their both style and look of their highlighting. I just think they do such a dramatically better job, and it's a small thing, but it means a lot. I think really the colors in Kaleido really come out more with this type of highlighting, and this will sound silly, but it was just a little more satisfying to knock to-do list off with this type of a highlighter than it's been with this one. Before we start making the comparisons between the Supernote and the 3C, I think my use case needs to be kind of explained a bit, because that's really the context in which I think some of these features are particularly important. Now, the way I use my Supernote is I take it to work, and what you need to understand about that is in the course of my work, I'm in a lot of meetings. And in these meetings, it's often that I'm playing a lot of roles. It's not unusual for me to be leading the meeting or for me to be playing a significant role in facilitation. Sometimes I'm a subject matter expert in the meeting. Sometimes someone is taking official minutes for the meeting, but that's specific to capture action items from the meeting. And I may be having my own individual action items which are separate from that. So I'm taking notes during the course of the meeting. This is the context that's really important because I've got all these things I'm having to do. And because I have these meetings at least one time a day, a lot of times multiple times a day, the note-taking during the meetings is critical. And it's the most important part of the day as it relates to taking notes. So what's important about that is that because I play all these roles, I have to take notes fairly seamlessly without large delays and that sort of thing. And so, for example, if I'm taking notes, sometimes the whole meeting can grind to a halt waiting for me to finish the notes. So I really try to minimize that and be respectful of other people's time. So that's why the flow and doing certain actions quickly becomes so much more important within that context. If I'm just taking notes outside of that, between meetings or at home, then there's some of these features aren't as essential. They're nice to have, but they're not as essential. But in the context of how I use the device, they become really essential. And there's other contexts that probably would leverage the same concerns. Like, for example, if you were in a school lecture or some situation where you're taking a lot of notes and you have to keep up with either the pace of the lecture or the pace of the meeting, that's where these features become particularly important. Okay, I hope that helped paint a picture, and it'll make more sense as I go through some of these various attributes as I compare the two devices. All right, let's take a look. So now we get to the comparison between the Supernote and the Boox. And the Boox, the 3C is here on the right, and the Supernote is on the left. And there are a number of things about the Supernote that really help with flow and make it more of an amenable device to use in a workplace environment. And we'll kind of start off not so much focusing on the flow aspect, but just on the UI itself. And I think there's a pretty significant difference here right off the bat between the Supernote and the Boox device, and that's around their menu bars. So you can see that the Supernote, in this case, has their menu bar up on top. Now it can be configured, it can go on the sides, but here I have it right on top. And the Boox menu bar goes over the top and on the side. So it's taking and crowding out more of the canvas. Now it's true that we can go ahead and click this button right here, which I'll do right now, and it shrinks the menu and really just focuses on all the things I want. This is a fully customizable menu for the Boox device. So this essentially then opens up that canvas just like the Supernote, but it has a couple problems that come with it. So if I want to basically back out of this note here, I have to click on that image yet again, and then I have to click on the back arrow to get to my menu of notes. Over here, obviously I don't have that problem with the menu, but even more importantly, I've got this little sidebar. So I can actually just swipe the sidebar down, and I get two options. One option are any of my pinned notes. I can have quick access to that, or I can click on the recent files lists, and it gives me a page of those recent files. So this does speak to flow a little bit, in that moving between notes is a little bit quicker if you don't want the crowding of the canvas to occur. So it adds another stroke. And it's a small thing, but small things do add up. Okay, another thing that's really important is the star marking system, which really hasn't been replicated in the Boox device. The star marking system is inherent here with the Supernote. And the basic idea is that I can draw a star, and that star will convert from a handwriting to an image, and that will therefore tell me that the device recognizes that I've marked that. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and just use my Boox stylus for each, since the ceramic stylus of the Supernote can only be used in the Supernote. It can't be used there. So we'll just make it simple. So let's go ahead and draw that star. Okay, so when it converts that image, it tells me it's captured that. There's nothing equivalent to that over here on the Boox device. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, let's go ahead and go into the search functionality of each one. we go. And I have the option to either search on the file names, keyword, star, or handwriting. So if I click on star, and then I click that search button, it's going to give me a list of files where the star appears. It'll start off with the list by files, and then you'll click a button and you can actually go by page. So if you have, say, 3 pages in one notebook, it starts off as 1 line, and then you can click a button and then it becomes 3. Okay. But the point being is that it's a marker that I can reliably check my to-dos, because I know the minute the system converts that to an image, like so, I'm good to go. Now, we've seemed like Boox was moving in that direction with its latest update, and maybe we are an update or 2 away. So for example, there is this ability to create shapes and to use the AI tool, like so, to create a perfect shape. But this is not searchable in the UI of the Notes app. So if I go ahead, we'll actually go ahead and we can search in here. But let me go ahead and actually go outside the notebook and do a search that way. Like so. So here are all the options you have around search. And you can search for tags, you can search for text, handwriting, and title. There's no symbol like the star symbol equivalent in the Boox device. Now, historically, when I first had the Note Air, I would use handwriting. And what I would do is I would just create a simple marker that I knew it would pick up most of the time, which is 2 X's. So if we back out of this, we'll do a search. We've got handwriting selected, and I'll just do XX. And we'll go ahead and search for that. Okay, so it found it. So that was kind of what I would call kind of the poor man's way of being able to do marking. It worked for a while. The problem was that it worked, I would say, 90 to 95% of the time. That means that I would have to-dos that I would invariably end up missing. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but in my workplace, on this device, I have over 100 notebooks, and many of them with multiple pages in them. So if I were to mark something like this and then miss it later because it didn't recognize the symbols, and I have no feedback loop to tell me it recognizes that X, right? Whereas here, I have a feedback loop to tell me it recognizes a star. It just did it right there. That's a critical difference between these 2 devices. And going back to this concept of flow, when I'm going through a meeting and I'm jotting notes down, I'm jotting to-dos down, I need a quick identifier that it's picking up what I want as a to-do. Think about the same scenario and with this method. So in theory, this method will work most of the time, but I'm going through notes quickly. So are those X's going to look as crisp as I'm jotting notes down fairly rapidly? Probably not. And that probably helped increase the likelihood that it wouldn't recognize the symbols I'd created. I don't have to think about that at all over here. So the to-do marking is significantly superior in the Supernote over the Boox. Boox feels like, through this new, shape tool that straightens the lines, it feels like it's moving a step closer, but it needs to be able to identify the shapes as a marker. So for example, maybe it's a triangle, and when it's a searchable triangle, it shows filled in. That could be an option. And then you go to the search thing, and then you search on triangles. So there's a couple pieces Boox has missing. They're one step closer with that new tool, but they haven't got there yet. Let's talk about erasing. So one of the things that's great about the Supernote is it has this wonderful erase function where you can take your 2 fingers and you can put it, and I find it works best to put it into the lower left corner of the device. So I'm just going to plant those 2 fingers there, and it becomes an eraser like so. See how quick that was? Boom, boom, like that. The Boox device took a pretty notable step in the right direction with its new AI tool where you kind of a scribble eraser, if you will. And if you go like this, see it's gone. And we'll go ahead and get rid of the triangle. So there's a great example where the scribble eraser is fantastic. The problem, though, is that if you have a sentence of text and you use a scribble eraser, it leaves artifacts behind. And I showed this on a previous video, but let's take another quick look at that in action. All right, so I wrote this sentence out. Let's go ahead and erase it and see how that goes. Okay. Try to do a little bit better this time. Okay. In both cases, this one a little more egregious than this one, there are artifacts that are left over from the erasing. In order for me to get fewer artifacts on the second line, I had to do a tighter scribble, which took a lot of time. When you use this function, the eraser function with the two fingers, you just need to click on that and circle the area, and it erases without any type of artifacts. Now, in full disclosure, the two-finger eraser function on the Supernote is not foolproof, and there are times when it doesn't work. I would say, given my technique of putting the two fingers in the lower corner, I found it to work at least 90% of the time, maybe even 95% of the time. So on occasion you do that, and it just draws a circle like that, and then you have to do it again, and then it gets rid of that circle. So not a flawless implementation of this eraser, but one that I still think is superior to what Boox has so far, and one that works much better in Flow. Now, this particular feature feels like it's just one more step away from being perfected. And, so the scribble becomes more of a lasso effect. It won't have artifacts like that. That could be an update away. So this is an advantage that the Supernote has that the Boox might be able to challenge pretty competently fairly soon, but not for now. For now, the Supernote works better in Flow. So the last thing I'll say about these two devices, particularly again in the context of this use case at work, the battery life does play a major role here. I don't mind the Boox's battery life in the way that I'm using it here in the study. I may have to charge it once a week, because I'm only using it on an occasional basis. Where the Supernote being the daily driver, I'm writing in this every day. Now, what I've found with the Supernote is that I have this routine. So I come home Friday night, I charge the device, and then once it's fully charged, I power it down, usually the next morning. I put it in my bag, and then when I go to work on Monday, the first thing I do is I pull it out of the bag, charge it up, and then leave it on until Friday when I go home, and the whole cycle starts again. So what I've found is that when I do come home and I plug in to charge the Supernote on that Friday night, the power levels on the Supernote, the remaining battery percentage, is usually between 60 and 70%. So I'm literally using only 30 to 40% of the battery, despite heavy usage, through the course of the week. That is really good battery life. Now, I have not taken the 3C into work to kind of test it out in that environment and see how it would perform. So I couldn't tell you how exactly the battery would drain, relative to the Supernote, other than I'm completely confident that the 3C would not be able to have that same amount of remaining battery as the Supernote does. Really, the only reason that I charge it weekly actually is just to be in a routine and never have to worry about thinking about recharging it. Otherwise I would charge it every 2 weeks. And that's just not something that I think the 3C would be able to handle. So, the conjunction of all the functionalities of the Supernote that helps particularly with flow and taking quicker notes, in conjunction with the battery, just makes this such a superior device for the work environment for me. I've never considered taking the 3C to work, and don't plan to do so in the future. The gap between them for my use case is that large. So those are my examples of other devices that I think do things better than the 3C. Again, a device I really like. It's just not perfect, and there are certain use cases where you'd want to look elsewhere than the 3C, and I've illustrated those for me here. Having said that, just to be clear, I do use the 3C. I have it here in my study. It's kind of a writing pad. I do to-do lists on it. I do kind of creative thinking on it, and it's actually really good. In fact, as much as I wouldn't use the 3C in the work environment as I use my Supernote, the reverse actually is true as well. I wouldn't use a Supernote for the purposes that I use the 3C here in my study. And that's because some of the things that the 3C can do, like having color, the writing feel of the screen, I actually think it's a better fit for my use case here in the office. But anyway, so I just hopefully this was all helpful. Hopefully they painted a more nuanced picture of the 3C and where it's strong and where maybe something else might be a better fit. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to put that in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day.